Most people set small goals, and that's why most people aren't living the life that they want. Do you want to increase your income by 10% next year? You know, from $100,000 a year to $110,000 next year? Or do you want to increase your income 10x in the next year from $100,000 to $1 million? Do you want to increase your free time from 10 days off last year or take 100 free days off with your family next year? Do you want to just lose a couple of pounds or do you want to completely transform your health this year? Now you may be thinking that sounds impossible, unrealistic, but in this video, I'm gonna show you exactly why setting bigger goals is actually safer than setting smaller goals and 3 ways you can roll this out in your life. There's too much information on this topic that it gets confusing whether you should set big goals or small measurable goals. For example, take Atomic Habits, James Clear's book on making micro improvements to your life. When I read that book, I started making 1% shifts to my life, but I was missing a bigger goal that was motivating me. And then on the other end of the spectrum, there's Grant Cardone's 10X rule book, which I've read like 5 times, talks about setting huge goals and not focusing on the little improvements that you can make. And then there's Dr. Benjamin Hardy and Dan Sullivan's new book, 10X is Easier Than 2X, which is kind of in the middle and talks about working smarter and harder to optimize your life towards your bigger goals. So I took what I learned from these 3 books along with Think and Grow Rich and The Magic of Thinking Big and created my own prescription, which includes setting big goals, making 1% improvements, and working smart and hard. By the way, you're probably thinking, why is this dude talking about this stuff? My name is Bill Hauser. 5 years ago, I was 26 years old, broke, and 5 years later, I received a $45 million offer for my business from scratch at 31 years old. I used this exact process to build my own business. And the number one reason that I've grown over the last 5 years of my life and my business is because I ask myself big questions. And the only reason I didn't go further than $45 million offer for my business is because I didn't ask bigger questions. And there's people going way further than that in their lives and businesses. So let's talk about step 1, how to set big goals. Before you start setting big goals, you have to ask yourself bigger questions. I started the video by asking, do you want to increase your income by 10% or do you want to 10x your income? Perfect example of a small question and a big question. Big question looks like this: how can I 10x my income in 1 year? And it forces you to see a bigger future for yourself because your subconscious mind cannot ignore a question. The opposite of this is setting small goals and therefore asking yourself small questions. And here's the risk of doing that. Number 1, unlimited options. When you ask yourself a small question, how do I increase my income by 10%? There's unlimited ways that you could answer that question. There's so many things you could do to increase your income by 10%. But on the opposite side, when you ask yourself a big question, how can I 10x my income? There's very few options. Number 2, there's a ton of competition for small goals because everyone else is setting them. If 1,000 people are chasing the same goal, it's a lot harder to reach than a goal that only 1 or 2 people are setting. That's why it's safer to set bigger goals. Number 3, when you set a small goal, working harder is always the answer. Why? Because if you want to increase your income by 10%, it's easy to see yourself working 10% harder. If you set a goal to 10x your income, it's impossible to work 10 times more hours in a day. Therefore, you realize that time input is only a tiny little factor to transforming your life. It's not about the grind. It's about finding the right strategy. Number 4, when you set a small goal, there's no real need for change. You can pretty much keep doing what you're doing without making any big changes in your life. And that's scary because that traps you in the same rut that you're in. Whereas when you ask yourself a big question, sometimes you have to change. And here's the beautiful thing about change. It doesn't require a lot of time. It just requires you making a decision. As a result of all this, when you set small goals, you get trapped in your life. I remember this is how it was for me when I was in school. I was setting small goals like getting a high GPA and getting rid of my anxiety, which I had every single day in school. Those two goals aren't big thinking, change the world, transform my life goals. They were incremental improvements. Oh, I just want to work a little bit harder to get better on my tests. I just want to get rid of this anxiety that I feel just a little bit more. But my life didn't change until I asked myself a bigger question. The first time I asked myself a bigger question and set a bigger goal was when I got my first sales job. I asked myself, how can I make $400,000 in my first year at my sales job? It was a crazy question tied to a crazy goal that my sales manager who interviewed me laughed at during the interview process when I told him what my goal was. But what did that big question force me to do? It forced me to cut all sources of retreat. It forced me to laser focus on sharpening my skills as a salesperson. It forced me to cut out all the people in my life who were weighing me down and people who weren't on my same growth trajectory. So it did three things for me. For me to make $400,000 in a year, it cut my options down to very few options. Number two, there was no competition for a goal of that size. I was the only person in the company with that big of a goal. And number three, I realized very quickly that working smarter and harder was the answer. And as a result, while everyone was laughing at me, I ended up becoming the #1 sales rep at yellowpages.com out of thousands of reps in my first job ever. And then I used the same exact process when I started my company SMB team, and I created a vivid vision document, which we have another video on this channel that breaks down, which I turned into my $256 million vision for my company. So here are the three exact steps that you can follow to get clear on your bigger goals. Number one, identify your big question. What is your big question around income, health, free time? What is it for you? Write down that big question. Number two, measure backwards to build momentum. Look back over all the progress you've already made in your life to give yourself a feeling of confidence and momentum as you approach this bigger goal or bigger question that you're asking. This is exactly what I did to craft my business strategy for SMB team. As I looked at what do I love sales, marketing, and coaching, and I built a company that helps people with sales, does marketing services, and literally coaches hundreds of business owners on how to improve their life and business. And then step three, I designed my future picture with painstaking clarity. So for me, in order to reach a $256 million a year revenue company, which was my vision, I knew I needed to have recurring revenue. I knew I needed to provide a real service to people. And number three, I knew I needed a blue ocean sales and marketing strategy for my own business to get in front of hundreds of thousands of my target clients in a very short time period. So take this first step of the process and use it to set bigger goals. That's bucket one. Bucket two, making 1% improvements. So now that I got you thinking big, now it's time to think about the 1% shifts that you can make right now in your life to get on the path to that bigger goal. In Atomic Habits, James Clear talks about the British cycling team where they made all these 1% improvements, like rubbing alcohol onto the tires of this bicycle team and changing the mattresses that this bicycle team slept on every single night, and this list of 100 little tiny optimizations that were made to the British cycling team, which eventually led to them winning the Tour de France multiple years in a row after being the worst cycling team in history. I know for me, when I started my sales job, the 1% shift that I had to make was doing sales training every single morning. This was so simple and required a little bit of discipline, but once I formed the habit, it was easier to do the trainings than to not do them. So my question to you for this step is, what are the tiny little improvements you can make to your life to get one step closer to that big goal that you wrote down? Number three, working smart and hard. Imagine this. Mr. Beast just changes his entire goal of his YouTube channel and just focuses entirely on quantity. Oh, we're just gonna put out one video a day, every single day for 365 days. Would that work as well for the most followed YouTuber in the world? Or sticking to what he's been doing, working smart and hard, he only puts out 1 or 2 videos a month, but each of those videos get 100 million views on average. Where would he be better fit? Working hard or working smart and hard? So you can only work so hard towards your big goal. Therefore, you realize pretty quickly you have to find the 80-20 leverage points of what your trade is. This comes from the 80-20 principle, which was discovered by Vilfredo Pareto in his backyard, where he had pea plants, that 20% of the pea plants produced 80% of the edible peas. And in our life, 20% of the things that we do on a daily, weekly, monthly basis have 80% of the impact on the outcomes that we want in our life. So working smart and working hard is you're grinding, you're working hard, and you're figuring out what to shave away, which is your 80%. Anything but the 20%, those precious things that have the biggest impact on your life, we have to shave away. I remember when I was in sales, the working smart and hard decision that I made was the day that I decided I was gonna stop doing face-to-face sales appointments and driving to everyone's office for sales. Instead, I said, hey, I'm only gonna do virtual appointments. And you know what happened? I tripled my sales because I was able to triple the amount of people I was able to see in a sales conversation every single week. So that didn't just mean I kicked my feet up and just went and relaxed with all the free time I got when I started doing virtual appointments. No, I continued working hard and working smart by optimizing the usage of my time. Remember this, the harder you work, the faster you fail. And there's two places to learn what your 20% of inputs are, those things you should be spending time on. A, you can learn through other people's failures, or B, you can learn through your own failures. And unfortunately, you have to learn from both. And it's safer to set big goals because you have to work smart and hard to reach them, because there's only so many hours in a day and it will save you time. But the biggest risk of all with setting small goals in your life is the regret minimization framework that Jeff Bezos came up with. What he says is travel to age 80 or 90 in your life and ask yourself, when you look back over your life, what are all the things you're gonna regret you didn't do? And those items should be put on your agenda right now. I can't think of a greater risk than living a life below your full potential as a human being. And for these reasons, I can confidently say that setting bigger goals is safer than living a life of quiet desperation with small goals that impel you into no action and trap you in what you're currently doing, whether or not it fulfills you. So that's my formula and reasoning for setting big goals and how you can roll it out in your life. I want you to comment below, what big goal are you gonna set and be public about as a result of this video so I can hold you accountable to it. And make sure you watch this next video so that you can get more information to transform your life. And I'll see you in the next one.